Hello and welcome to Rates and Ravings. I'm John from Room 100 and these are my reviews for May of 2021. So I'm going to be a smart content creator this time and put the longer, more interesting thing at the end of the video and cover two shorter topics first. The first of those is the new Mortal Kombat movie available on HBO Max. I don't have too much to say about this movie because thankfully this was basically what I wanted out of Godzilla vs. Kong. It's stupid, it's just a lot of action without too much plot and character development, but it's pretty entertaining. To go basically as in-depth with the plot as the movie does, there's this guy who is the descendant of Scorpion, whatever his family lineage is, and he has the mark of Mortal Kombat, which means that he is basically a chosen warrior who has to compete in this contest. And if Earth Realm loses this contest one more time, then the Nether Realm or the Outworlds or whatever is going to invade Earth and destroy it. So he leaves his family behind to protect them and meets up with Sonya Blade. And the two find this temple with Raiden and start training, and Shang Tsung is getting his armies together with a bunch of Mortal Kombat characters, and it's just a bunch of fight scenes basically. Spoiler alert, but the end of the movie more or less undoes any of the deaths that are done throughout the movie. So, like, nothing really of importance happens. It's just a bunch of cool fight scenes and establishing that this is a new film universe. The acting ranges from serviceable to kind of bad. Like, the lead is okay. Sonya Blade at first I thought was pretty likable and doing this role pretty well, and then I realized that she only has one thing with the same kind of silly smile the entire movie. So she had some pretty rough moments. Absolutely no standouts at all, but fine. Though in terms of standouts, I would say a very bad standout was some of the editing of this movie. For the most part, like, some of the fight scenes have some decent editing and most of it is, again, serviceable. But there's a couple really, really rough moments that, like, I don't know why they were approved. They are just absolutely terrible editing. I know there's a moment in the temple where Sonya Blade is fighting one of Shang Tsung's crew, and the cuts there are just really, really bad. Oh, and there's another moment in the temple, except this time where they're training, and that is really rough too. At that part of the movie, they just forgot how to edit, I guess. But I would say the things that you come to this movie for are, for the most part, good. The action is overall pretty decent with some pretty nice effects throughout. Nothing really pulled me out. I'd say the fights could have been improved with better editing, and there's just a general feeling that all the fights are leading up to certain moments. They definitely don't feel natural at all, and there's definitely moments in the fights where you kind of lose track of what's going on. The action isn't always perfectly cut or perfectly in the focus of the frame, but it usually does kind of ramp up and down and lead to these really nice moments of, you know, special moves from the game or fatalities and things like that. Speaking of which, I did think that pretty much all of those moments were fun and enjoyable. I love that they kept it super gory and just like over the top and stupid like the game franchise. And all the references, whether they were in those special moves and fatalities or just lines of dialogue that are super ham-fistedly put into the movie that the characters are basically reading off of a cue card, I thought those were all fine. Like, they're definitely cheesy, but I'd put that cheese on a sandwich. There's a couple moments where they really, really lean into the meta on the nose kind of stuff with like cueing super dramatic music when I think it's Liu Kang is, you know, going through his whole name or lineage or whatever. It's either him or his friend, and then it cuts to Kano making some dumb joke or something like that. There was never anything that really, really took me out. It mostly just made me laugh, but I think in a way that they intended. I would say the music is overall pretty good in this category too. I am really happy that they did use those old themes and motifs from the old movie theme. It usually comes in at pretty good times. The only real complaint I have is that they never really just let it breathe and go, because like, it's a bop all on its own. They could legit drop the same crummy MP3 file in and I would have no complaints at all. Sometimes they add on it really nicely and add more like dramatic modern movie stuff to it, but sometimes it feels like they cut it out right before it's really gonna drop. So it's a mixed bag, but I like that the theme's there anyway. Yeah, that's it. I have nothing else to say about this movie. I think it's mostly for the fans. Like, as a pseudo fan of the series, I've only played a couple of the games. I definitely am not a hardcore fan who knows all this stuff, but even I recognize, you know, most of the characters and the special moves, fatalities, the, you know, cheesy lines and references. So I did enjoy it. I would say this is mostly for the fans, but I think that anyone who's just looking for like a corny fighting action movie should enjoy this. So I'm giving Mortal Kombat a 6 out of 10. Next up, keeping to the gory theme, I wanted to cover the new DLC that was released for Doom Eternal that kind of passed me by when they first came out, but I finally had time to sit down and play them, and I want to talk about it since Doom is a huge part of this channel. The Ancient Gods Part 1 and 2 was released for Doom Eternal, and I think picks the story up directly after Doom Eternal's main campaign ends, basically just tries to play the final note of that brutal song. To just jump right in and start with Part 1, the main thing that struck me at first was the game. After not having played for so long, it felt like the game reached out and punched me in the face. It was kind of a shock to jump right back in, get used to all the weapons that you have, and immediately have all those enemies thrown at you, because this game definitely expects you to kind of just jump right in after the main campaign. You start in the UAC Atlantica facility, which gives me big Camino vibes, but I really like this aesthetic and this general environment. I think it's a pretty good opening to the DLC. You also get the Marauders pretty early on, and I love the changes that they made to them. They were definitely pretty aggravating in the main campaign, but with their kind of extended stun time, as soon as you get into the rhythm of them, I know a lot of people still have issues with them, but I really enjoyed fighting them. The dogs can be a little annoying, but once you get used to the timing of that eye mechanic and find kind of the ideal range to trigger that, and then just make the most out of their time stunned, whether it's freezing them or just keeping on them with the super shotgun, I thought they were totally fine. Then we moved to the Blood Swamps, which I had heard a lot about before actually playing it myself. I had heard that they were really brutal, and I'll say that as a setting, aesthetically, I also do really like this, and I think it has some of the best music of the DLC. But despite it being very cool and fitting into Doom pretty well, it was probably my least enjoyed and my most died in for sure. Some of the arenas are really, really tough, and I would say overall the level design of Part 1 isn't amazing all the time. Part of the toughness of those arenas, besides just sending a ton of super tough monsters at you, is that it sometimes feel like your feet are getting caught on the environment, and I just wasn't able to traverse as smoothly as I was wanting, and it definitely led to a lot of deaths. The final boss with the floating eye boxes was okay too. It didn't really do anything for me. I suppose I should take this time to also talk about the other thing that made the Blood Swamps really, really annoying, which are the spirits, and I'll talk about the new enemies that this DLC added in general. Which is to say, not a lot. Part 1 doesn't really feel like it adds a lot. It feels like it just kind of puts it in new environments, which sometimes is okay, but especially when I start talking about Part 2, you'll see that Part 2 really goes all in on some of its new concepts, and I really love that, whereas this kind of just feels like a really challenging add-on. The turrets that you need to scope in for are okay. I like that they kept using that means of using precision to get more ammo. Same goes for the blood makers, but they also introduced the spirits, which suck. Like, they're just, I'm sorry, they're not good. They are completely unfun to fight. And all of that is because when an enemy is possessed by a spirit, you can't freeze them, you can't stun them, they do not stop hunting you down, and they just deal so much damage, they take so much damage. They're just not fun and not balanced at all, and then you have to try to Ghostbuster these stupid things when they pop out and try not to die while you're doing that, or else you have to deal with another possessed demon. They're really bad. They're the weakest part of the DLC for sure. Then after the Blood Swamps, we go to the final section, the Halt. It's pretty, but it doesn't really do a lot for me. The final boss was super annoying because it was built around those spirits. There are certain sections that I thought were cool, like when the pillars raise and lower and get reused for a couple different fights. I thought that was decent. And just as a general Doom Eternal note, the shield guys are still very annoying. Like, they definitely led to a bunch of my deaths because I'm about to glory kill someone and get a bunch of health back when I'm just on the brink, and then boom, a shield pops right in front of them and I get demolished. Oh, and plot-wise, I guess spoilers, the fact that the Dark One, basically the devil, Satan, is just like their version of you is very silly, but in a way that it doesn't bug me at all, because at this point the series has just gone full wacko. With all my gripes, it's still really fun to jump into Doom Eternal. Like, it was great to be back and playing that game again because it feels so good. There's so many moments where you just whip around and snag a grenade on someone and blow them up and go right through them, and then you chainsaw somebody. It's just exhilarating and super fun. and addicting and makes you feel great. So I would give part 1 alone a really strong 7.5, leaning towards an 8, but with all the focus on the spirits, a 7.5 out of 10. And then there is part 2, which is really goddamn good. Like, seriously, this almost blows part 1 out of the water. I was amazed how much more fun I was having with this. The shorter runtime probably contributes this because there's just no fat. It's all just really great action and new stuff and just ways to make you feel badass. The level design is so much cleaner in this one. I like when it's just like an open field, like there's some stuff to duck behind, there's a little bit of hilliness, but when it's just an open field, you can really, take in everything that's going on, all of the enemies that are around you right now, and feel out what you need to prioritize, who needs to go first, who will give you, extra armor or ammo and stuff like that. I would say aesthetically, it leans a little bit more into like an 80s power fantasy kind of thing instead of just like raw, really gritty Doom stuff, but it doesn't bug me at all. I still think it's feeding into the same brand of silliness, so I enjoyed it. Every section, whether it's that kind of super green fantasy inspired world sphere or the more Halo 3 feeling Reclaimed Earth, and then that final big battle in Hell in the capital city of Amora, they're all really good, and they introduce some really awesome new stuff that expands the gameplay in great ways. There's new grapple points for the shotgun, which add some pretty interesting movement options and make for nice little platforming sections. The Screecher enemy, which is kind of like a witch from Left 4 Dead combined with the spirits, is just a way better spirits thing because it means that for once in Doom, you're trying to not kill something very specifically because if they die, they will buff the enemies around them. The Armored Baron is fun as well. I think that's a good combination of a couple different, weaknesses and just ways to fight them. The Stone Imp is an annoying new enemy, but not because it's poorly designed. I do think they're kind of fun, but it's just because I basically always had the grenade on the combat shotgun for the Caco demons. And this was like one of the only times where I felt like I really had to switch add-ons to deal with multiple enemies. And there's just like a couple seconds that can really screw you over, or especially if you forget which one you have on at the time. The Curse Prowler is also a fun concept that I think adds an interesting element to the gameplay, but can be a real bastard. Specifically because he limits your movement, which is so important to survival in Doom. If he gets even a little bit far away from you, or if there's like a bunch of shield generating people on the field, it can be tough and you might just straight up die, especially if you also need to worry about refilling your blood punch in this much slower state. They can be really tough, but I do like the concept in general. Riot Shielders are okay. They're slightly annoying, but I do still like the method by which you do need to try to kill them. And the escalation encounters were a pretty fun way to go about that. I like that it's just dead center of the main game, but still gives you the options to go even farther if you want the cosmetics and not just the upgrades. I really liked how they were implemented. Speaking of the point of those escalation encounters, the Sentinel Hammer is godlike, amazing addition, just fantastic game design. It's so helpful. It's way more engaging and kind of thought-provoking in the way you use it than the Crucible was. You can get it really easily by targeting weak points or by doing glory kills, which encourages you to use it more, but it's not super overpowered because it's just basically a really strong stun. But you can chain that stun against larger or stronger enemies in really fun ways, like stunning into freezing, into the shotgun or the minigun, and then you just go around and glory kill to get some more. It's great. I had so much fun using that. There's also a little bit more BFG ammo in this one, speaking of the super weapons of the game, and I really appreciate that as well, because in part 1 it felt like I was able to use it a whole 3 times, but this it felt like it was a little more prevalent, and I was still conserving it, but not as afraid to use it. I died way less in this one as well, though sometimes the deaths were because I felt some of the platforming was a little unclear, especially in the earlier parts of this DLC. There's just not a lot of textural or lighting delineation, so it can be a little confusing. But by the end, it's all action. I think the cutscene with Immoral, their endgame portal scene, was really epic and great. I thought the music there was excellent. And the final fight with the Dark Lord was pretty good. I think it was one of the stronger boss fights of Doom Eternal in general. I was never a huge fan of the boss fights. I would have liked it a little more if they'd implemented all the gadgets and tricks that you learn throughout the game with different weaknesses of the different enemies. As it stands, he's kind of just like a marauder, plus he has more deadly attacks and he can spawn in those weird kind of fake enemies, but he also spawns into dogs, and the main point is hit him when his eyes glow when he gets too close, and then you deal a bunch of damage. I think there are definitely ways where you could have implemented maybe the rapid fire shotgun if he goes into like some weird charging stone mode like the stone imps, or maybe he has an attack that opens up part of his armor and you have to shoot a grenade in there, or even more stuff built around the scoping in to shoot at a certain weak point. I would have just like a couple different ways to handle this encounter instead of just finding the exact range that will trigger the animation that you want. But all things said, I think this part of the DLC was way better than part 1. It's just super fun and engaging. All the new stuff is great, and it really puts your brain to the test of having to use all of these different elements all at once to successfully navigate this game. It doesn't feel like they're just cranking up the difficulty for no reason. Oh, and to talk about the music for a second, obviously these were songs that were not written by Mick Gordon because of the weird falling out between him and id and Bethesda, which it does suck because his sound, and especially his mixing, is so key to the feel of the Doom games. I had my reservations going in, especially with Andrew Hulshult. I liked his Doom covers and remixes, but they never did a whole lot for me, especially mixing wise. But I think musically itself, it's all pretty good and enjoyable with some really strong moments. Like, I think there's some great tunes in the Blood Swamps, and then in Imora with the cutscene especially, I thought the music was really strong, but you definitely do feel the difference in the quality of the mixing and mastering compared to Mick Gordon. It's not quite as full and tight, but it's song-wise, it's still pretty good. So for part 2, I would give it a strong 9 out of 10, absolutely recommend it. And I think on the whole, with Doom Eternal's original score of an 8.5, it basically stays there between the quality of Ancient Gods Part 1 and 2. And finally, we're going to end on the biggest topic of the episode, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Marvel's latest Disney Plus show. I'm going to go right into discussing the individual episodes, but on the whole, I'll say that I really enjoyed the show, and I think it's up to par with WandaVision. I think it had a weaker beginning, but a more consistent middle to end. But I do think that it doesn't quite hit the same beats for me personally that WandaVision did, that really brought it up to a high level of quality. It is still really nice to get these shows about the side characters to fully kind of fill them out and make them feel like they're getting a proper introduction into the world. And this show does continue that like WandaVision did. It's really great to watch these characters on their own. As I said, the beginning of this show didn't really hook me, and I was already a bit skeptical because WandaVision was such a specific execution and kind of way that they were doing this show that it was like basically made for me. I just loved the idea behind that show, whereas this was just kind of like a Marvel thing, except instead of a movie it was a show. There's going to be action, a little bit of politics, and stuff like that. And for the first maybe episode and a half, that's all I was really getting out of this show. The first episode was for sure the weakest. The action really didn't do anything for me. And, it's before the kind of main plots of this really get going. They set up some good stuff with Bucky trying to right his wrongs, but they only sort of stuck with it throughout the show. But I did like introducing Sam's family and kind of the more racial themes of the show. I thought that stuff was really good. John Walker as a plot device was pretty good, even though the arc was super apparent. Then episode 2 is a little bit more of the same, but I think it was better overall because you do start to get the dynamic between Sam and Bucky and John Walker. Some of the character moments between Sam and Bucky are really good. Either they're really funny or really, a pretty good kind of serious drama, even though it gets a little bit old when they start talking about the shield and Sam giving it up and all that stuff. And then episode 2 also introduces Isaiah Bradley, who I think was an excellent choice for this series. Like, I think that he introduced some really interesting concepts behind the idea of being a superhero and a black superhero with that. But then episode 3 is where it starts to get really good, with basically the introduction of Zemo. Again, these Marvel shows just keep developing these side characters and villains and things like that, and it's really great. I love what they did with Zemo. He plays off of Sam and Bucky really interesting. I loved seeing kind of the different aspects of him, whether it's his more wealthier side, the jacket's sick, his kind of outlook on superheroes in general, which gets followed through super cleanly in the following episodes, and his abilities. I love that you got to see this elite kill squad version of Zemo. I thought that was really important and it kind of helps you understand how he got to where he did in Civil War. Madripoor is a decent setting, mostly aesthetically. I did like watching Bucky kind of shift into his fake Winter Soldier persona, and especially when they would reuse that theme to go along with that. They pulled a couple of different themes from throughout the Captain America franchise, and they were all great because they're really solid little motifs. And Sharon coming back was kind of nice and you know, overall done pretty decently. I do want to rewatch though, because spoilers, the whole power broker thing, I want to go and rewatch to make sure that actually makes sense and like wasn't kind of contradicted anywhere throughout the show. I don't think it was, but it did feel just a little weird. But it didn't bother me that much. Oh, and the fight scene at the end of the episode was really solid. Episode 4 continues the hot streak with the Wakandans. I really liked the flashback scene there with Bucky and getting more emotional about not being mind controlled anymore. I thought that was really nice, and I overall really liked how the Wakandans were used throughout the show. A lot of the conversations, whether it was between our heroes or when the heroes were talking to the villains of the show, I thought were pretty decent. Carly and her whole mentality and stuff was okay, but I'll talk about the Flag Smashers more later in the video. I think this was where you start to really get a good characterization for Sam, and mostly the difference between him and Walker, just the way that Sam treats these situations and treats people like people with his own personal experience. I think this is where Sam starts to become a really, really strong character, when it starts to move away from the whole semantics of him giving up the shield. I think all the stuff surrounding the super soldier serum was really good too. I really liked that Zemo got his moment to just destroy them, because that is in the end what he wants. He doesn't like want power for himself necessarily. Like, he doesn't want to be what he thinks this is because he thinks it will corrupt him, or you know, whatever his reasons are. I love that he just goes and smashes them, and that is his goal. Meanwhile, I like that the fight with the Wakandans gave Walker that they don't even have powers kind of moment, even though it's like, dude, calm down, they're Wakandans, I wouldn't fret about it. And then him kind of contemplating taking the serum. I do think those are really good moments. And of course, this episode ends with the big kind of flip in John Walker's character, with his friend Lamar dying, and he kind of goes off the deep end, especially after he had taken this serum, and just straight up murders the guy. I thought that was executed really well, and it made total sense in the progression of the show. And I would say this was like, episodes 3 and 4 were maybe some of the higher moments of the whole show for me. Not to leave out episode 5 though. Episode 5 has some great moments, mostly kind of quieter character moments that are really, really nice, and definitely missed in a lot of the more larger MCU projects with the movies. But it is probably the last of the really strong episodes. The opening fight is great. It's really brutal and visceral, and the arrest of Zemo was really nice as well. Bucky kind of getting his moment and giving him to the Wakandans. Walker losing his title is a good progression. The introduction of Julie Louis-Dreyfus's character is okay. I don't really know where I stand on her character right now. She feels a lot like the Handler from Umbrella Academy, or trying to play a very similar role in the kind of like weird off-kilter woman in charge kind of vibe. But I don't know. We'll have to see how that whole thing progresses, because right now it doesn't do a lot for me. But like I said, there's some really strong just kind of conversational character moments, one of which is with Sam and Isaiah Bradley. They went to a lot of places that I didn't think they would. Like, some of this is, I think, a little bit safer in terms of the whole discussion of race in America, but a lot of aspects of this conversation were really good and explored some really good themes and concepts. Though I do like that episode 6 in the recap kind of cherry picks this conversation to make it feel a little more okay when Sam ultimately does become Captain America. Like, the first part of the quote is, "They will never let a black man be Captain America," and that's what they use in the recap, because it's like, not if he's an awesome guy like Sam is. But then the second part of that is, "and no self-respecting black man would want to be." I think that's the much more interesting part that the show kind of addresses, but also doesn't want you to think about too much, because they want Sam to be Captain America. And then the hanging out with Sam's family and the training scenes were really good. I think you absolutely see Sam earn this role without the powers. He becomes Captain America. And you also see Bucky start to kind of get used to normal life, and just, you know, hang out with Sam's family. just kind of let his guard down a little bit. There's some really sweet moments with that. And so that whole ending of the episode was really good. And then episode 6, the finale, was good, but it was definitely a little bit rushed and questionable in the same way that WandaVision's finale was. First, I have to say that the new costume looks excellent. I love that he is just Captain America now, but he still has the Falcon wings and he's got the shield. It's great. He kind of almost works as a combination Captain America and Iron Man. Captain America in, you know, what he stands for, and he has the shield, but then Iron Man because he can fly and he has Red Wing and kind of a little bit of gadgetry to him. I'm so looking forward to him leading the Avengers and kind of just being a huge integral part of that. The action's really good. Like I said earlier, Bucky doesn't have a ton of resolution. Like, they kind of wrap up his stuff, but his whole thing kind of got sidelined to handle some of the more difficult racial topics of the show, which again, I think is fine because I do ultimately think that those themes were done pretty well and they're absolutely super important. But he does still feel a little bit like a side character, even in this side character show. I think the ending of Walker's plot wasn't really what I expected, or honestly what I was looking for. Like, it's clear that he's just driven by revenge and he's crazy and he not really used to having this power, so he's going a little nuts from that as well. But I totally thought that the direction that this show was going to go in was that the Flag Smashers were going to be handled by like episode 5, and then in episode 6 it would be completely about him becoming, I think it's the Super Patriot is the character in the comics, and just like going nuts. And it's like, you know, the true villain isn't these kind of outsiders as we view them in America. It's people in the country. It's the people who think they're doing the right thing but are just totally driven by like revenge and greed and just anger and that kind of thing. So for him to kind of turn back to good and still kind of think of himself as good and still be that kind of nicer personality even as US agent, I think it's a little worse than what I was expecting to happen for him, but it's still okay. Sam's speech after he saves everyone is really good, if a little bit long, and I think keeping Zemo around and then introducing the Julie Louis-Dreyfus character, I think those are both really great choices because I just want villain team-ups in this next phase of the MCU. Please give us some villain team-ups. Oh, and the cookout scene at the end is excellent. I, again, love just seeing Sam with his family and then introducing Bucky into that as, like, this new, like, Uncle Bucky, I guess. And there's just a bunch of really great moments with the two of them, either together or just kind of, like, hanging out. Really nice, happy ending scene. To cover some broader aspects of the show, of course, most importantly is the racial elements, and I think that they were generally done pretty well. Of course, this is just me as a white guy, so like I can't say with utmost certainty or life experience, but I thought it definitely could have been done worse. There's elements that could have been done better, but overall I think they handled it in a really good way that I think ultimately got a positive message across. I've read things with mixed feelings on it, but I do ultimately like that the show and Marvel took a stand and just made him Captain America while they still did touch on all of the other elements that a real person of color would consider stepping into this role. Not only that, but you get to see him train and really earn the role. It's not like a Rey Star Wars kind of thing where she's just really, really good. Not that that ever bothered me that much, but it is nice to see this whole training montage, and you've seen Sam kind of from day one of knowing Steve, really kind of like putting himself up to the same bar that Steve does and slowly becoming and training to be Captain America. You also see John Walker, which is the concept that I think some people would prefer, of like, let's just get some, you know, new guy who kind of reminds you of Steve, you know, really, you know, exceptional soldier, things like that, super nice guy, and then, you know, watch what it does to him. And I think it was important to see that as well, because it kind of quells the naysayers of like, no, look, Sam is it. Sam is the one you want to be Captain America. And then the Flag Smashers, I thought were probably the weakest element of the show, the way they tied into all of the themes and as just a villain organization in general. Disregarding their motive, which does play into some other themes kind of nicely, they are just kind of like there. They're not very interesting. And I like I said, I really did think that they would not be the ultimate final villain that had to be defeated in the show. I thought they would be done and gone by episode 5, and John Walker would present a much more interesting look into, you know, him becoming a villain, as well as kind of that aspect and how it plays into the other themes of Sam becoming Captain America. There's just a lot of nuance that the show, I think, puts its energy towards in other places that it leaves behind for this whole thing. It's just this very typical Marvel thing where they take this group who are supposed to be the bad guys, and it's like, hey, here's this very realistic and, you know, completely understandable thing that they want. Obviously, the people who have been snapped or the people who weren't snapped all deserve housing and, you know, deserve to have that safety, but they kill people, so they're the bad guys. I think it's an interesting enough topic, just not super well handled, because none of the characters of the Flag Smashers really stick out to me as super interesting, and then it just becomes really apparent when they want you to stop sympathizing with them. But you know, you don't forget about the main goal. The main goal is that you don't kick out millions of people onto the street. Regardless, by the end, I'm glad that they don't totally shut this out with Sam's speech and his kind of main point of like, you have the power and money, you're about to, you know, send armies to, you know, dehouse all of these people, you know, relocate or whatever. You have this power and money, make it happen. And I think that was a really great sentiment, and I totally agree with that. So all in all, I really liked the show a lot more than I expected, honestly. I thought it was going to be very generic, but they went to a lot of places that I didn't expect them to, and I really appreciated that. It still didn't, you know, surpass WandaVision for me, just because of the high concept that WandaVision works in, as well as the production elements of WandaVision. There is a little bit of janky CGI here and there, just because they don't get to rely on the older TV show styles that WandaVision did. But it works on a bunch of levels. Obviously, you get all of the different themes of, you know, the new Captain America and race and housing and things like that, and just the general rights of people. And you also get to fill out all of these side characters like Sharon and Zemo and Bucky and Sam, who all just get really great moments, have some really great conversations, and it just does a great job. So I'm giving The Falcon and the Winter Soldier an 8 out of 10, just like WandaVision, but it is still ranked lower than WandaVision and just barely misses out the top 10 of all of my MCU properties. All right, a couple quick side notes. These are just two movies that I watched recently that I either didn't have a lot to say about, or they came out a little bit ago and I didn't want to do a full thing in this video. The first was The Mitchells vs. the Machines, which is a new Sony animation project, just kind of a family movie about a robot apocalypse because of AI, and it's like, you know, obviously commenting on things like Amazon and Silicon Valley in general. So this family has to go on a huge road trip just before the main character and daughter is going to college, and they have to put an end to it and save the world, basically. I just don't have a lot to say about it because it was fun. It was an enjoyable movie with, I think, some really strong animation, even if they leaned into the meme kind of stuff way too much, like the freeze frames and all. But I would recommend it because I think it does a good job at what it wants to do. It's extremely colorful and expressive. I think there were definitely a lot of jokes that made me laugh because there are team members from the Gravity Falls team who were a huge part of this. I don't want to say specifically because I don't remember, but Gravity Falls is one of my favorite animated shows, and a lot of the humor and solid writing from that does carry over into this. Not every joke is a hit, but there's definitely some moments and set pieces that are very good. And it also does go a little bit deeper than just smartphones are bad. It goes more into the point of like, smartphones can do amazing things, but it's what we use them for and how we can implement them into our lives that help us, you know, share moments and, you know, connect with the people we love. That's more important. So I would overall recommend this, but don't go in expecting anything amazing, and I would give it a 6 out of 10. And I also just watched Tenet, which of course came out sometime last year. The newest Christopher Nolan movie, always covering kind of brainy topics, and this is one of his more confusing ones that I've seen, at least. To not even break the surface, basically this movie revolves around the concept of reversing time in real time, so two things are happening at once and it's kind of all colliding, so things are, you know, you see it play out one way and then you realize that it was the same group of people doing it but in the other way, and they're trying to stop the end of the world basically in this like huge war with multiple timelines going on, but it all kind of converges on one point to stop it. I really don't want to get too much into it. I just will say that I do recommend it. it was a bit confusing to its own detriment sometimes, but I think after sitting on it and reading and watching some stuff on it, I do think it was really interesting and well done. It was super well done, as most Christopher Nolan is. Definitely some choppy audio editing with the dialogue, as people say. Still really great action, really great set pieces with some really interesting concepts. And I will also specifically shout out Ludwig Göransson for the score. Amazing score, some really awesome work. At first I wasn't sure if it was still Hans Zimmer, but he was busy with something else. And I think that there are elements that still kind of match that usual sound in a Christopher Nolan film, but there's also the really key Ludwig Göransson elements, like that low sub bass and kick drum that he does in a lot of his stuff. He made some real bangers on this. Totally would check it out, if not just for the soundtrack. So I would recommend this movie, and I would give it a 7.5 out of 10. All right, that does it for this episode. My camera's about to die, so let me know what you think about any of the things I talked about. June is going to be a little weird just because I'm not sure how much I'm going to play or watch, but E3 is coming up, so that might be a big topic of next month's video. Meanwhile, you can check out things like my new music that I just put out. I just put out 5 new songs on YouTube, and I uploaded those and some remastered versions of older singles I put out onto streaming services like Spotify, Apple Music, all that. Absolutely check that out. I'm really proud of it. Would love for you to listen to it. I'll also have a couple new Smash videos coming up before E3, including Ready, Move, Set, Go, and a video on Valve newcomers that could come to Smash. So as always, be sure to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.